believe that fair housing would, in our time, become the unchallenged law of this land. And indeed, this bill has had a long and stormy trip.
Connecticut is one of the most segregated states in the country, looking at both economic and racial segregation.
Why is fair housing important? I'm a civil rights lawyer and have always approached this from, the perspective of, what are the harms of racial segregation? I don't think I really understood this deeply until I moved to Connecticut. I was really taken aback by the stark neighborhood disparities and the really intense racial and economic segregation in Hartford, Bridgeport, New Haven. And I really saw that driving all of the inequities that were present. And when I came to the ACLU in 1987, we were working on a whole range of issues, and it seems like everything kind of traced back to segregation. And everyone have always pointed out that segregation is the most effective mechanism to deliver unequal outcomes to African Americans, and you can really see that in Connecticut.
Connecticut did not become one of the most racially and economically segregated states in the country by accident. Years of discriminatory decisions by both public and private actors result in the segregation we see in our communities today. For example, many of Connecticut's cities, those with the highest numbers of people of color, were redlined by our financial institution for many years. Redlining is the practice of financial institutions refusing to give borrowers credit to buy homes in areas that are majority people of color. You can still see the effect of redlining in many of Connecticut's cities, like the North End of Hartford, which still is one of the poorest neighborhoods in Connecticut. As a result of these policies, Connecticut remains segregated, and it is up to groups like ours here at the Connecticut Fair Housing Center to reverse decades of discriminatory decisions which have resulted in the way our cities and towns are organized today. In 1968, Congress passed the Federal Fair Housing Act, which outlawed many types of individual acts of discrimination. 50 years after the passage of the Federal Fair Housing Act, many of Connecticut's residents still face discrimination. Yet where we live still matters, perhaps now more than ever. It determines where our children go to school, where we get jobs, our access to transportation, and even our health outcomes. Because where we live is so important, it is important that the Fair Housing Act continue to be enforced today. Housing discrimination should not prevent people from accessing the housing of their choice and the amenities that they and their families need.
There was a need for a dedicated fair housing center 25 years ago because the problem of residential segregation is a particularly deep-rooted problem in our society and in our country and our state.
I think we all recognized in the early 90s that there was a need for an organization that was solely dedicated to fair housing. And Connecticut didn't have anything like that. And that's really when we brought a committee together to say, here's a funding opportunity. We officially launched in 1994 and then incorporated in 1996.
The staff is able to do cutting-edge work day in and day out and be leaders in the field of fair housing nationally, and it's such a wonderful thing. This organization not only exists but is thriving. The Fair Housing Center is so needed today, maybe more so than it was even 25 years ago.
The Connecticut Fair Housing Center has 4 programs. First, we take complaints from people who think that they may have been the victim of housing discrimination. If we find evidence that a violation of the law has occurred, our lawyers will represent people in courts or administrative agencies to vindicate their rights. Second, we provide education to people who might be at risk of housing discrimination, as well as to people who are in the business of providing housing.
Well, we found out the risk of losing the house when I got a letter. My wife told me about the reverse mortgage. The people that I were introduced to fair housing, Ms. Sarah White, she's the one that advised me about different things. If I would have had to move, I had to start all over again. That's what the problem would be. As is, I'm still here, so everything's okay.
The center has helped our consumers at Independence Unlimited in many ways. They often write reasonable accommodations on behalf of our consumers and have fought many legal cases on their behalf and won. The best thing about the Fair Housing Center to me is the education that they give to the landlords in the community.
The goal of our education project is to ensure that everyone knows and understands their fair housing rights and responsibilities. 3, we work with state, federal, and local agencies in order to ensure that the fair housing laws are being enforced and to ensure that everyone has access to the housing of their choice. Finally, the Fair Housing Center is working with homeowners in danger of losing their home to foreclosure to determine if there is some way to get a mortgage modification so that people can stay. All 4 of these programs are designed to ensure both that people have access to the housing of their choice, as well as to ensure that the communities in which they live meet all of their needs.
My son's name is Christian. He is 17. He has autism spectrum disorder. Me and my son were living with, I want to say 30 different health code violations, from peeling paint to paint peeling out of radiators to roaches in our refrigerator, stove. So after reaching out to Connecticut Fair Housing, the attorney Pamela Heller, returning my phone calls, responding to my emails, but then simultaneously we were working together. If I wasn't calling the office, Attorney Heller was calling the office, the teamwork from it all, and that's how it should be in agencies like this. It should be the community and agency working together. Now in our new place, me and my son are very happy, and if it wasn't for the CT Fair Housing and it wasn't for Attorney Heller, constantly reminding me that it was okay, that I was advocating for this and it was my right.
It has been my personal mission to make sure that everybody understands how fantastic this center is. They are invaluable, their knowledge, as well as their follow-through and their persistence.
My brother was up for renewal, and at that time was told that he was not going to be allowed to stay in his apartment that he had been residing in for 18 years. We called Connecticut Fair Housing Center, and they were absolutely our saviors.
There are places where sometimes tenants or people seeking housing don't know what their rights are. There are places where people who are offering housing don't know their obligations. We help people who don't understand their rights or people who don't understand their obligations to know what they should be doing, and it's either through education, sometimes through enforcement, but it's leveling the playing field in an important and critical part of our society and a very important role for the Fair Housing Center to play.